Welcome to Recipes for Grief, heartfelt storytelling for feely foodies. I'm your host, Andrea Sexton Dumas. What a lovely conversation this is with artist and death doula Brianna Hernández. We talk about her mom, Miss Sylvia, her multimedia art installations, the artist's role in creating cultural death rituals, and metabolizing grief through art. Of course, there's lots of links in the episode page of your podcast player for you to check out her art in videos, photographs, installations, as well as an article that she wrote. Brianna L. Hernández is a Chicana artist, curator, and death doula, guided by socially engaged practices. In the studio, she creates multimedia installations focused on end-of-life care, grief, and mourning rituals based on lived experience, cultural research, and collaborations with peers, including death education workshops. She proudly serves as Director of Curation and Board Secretary of Ma's House and BIPOC Art Studio on the Shinnecock Indian Reservation, and as Assistant Editor at the Parrish Art Museum in Watermill, New York. Brianna Hernández, thank you so much for joining me on Recipes for Grief podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I thought we would start out by talking about your mom. If you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about her and your closeness. I know that today is her birthday, which is really special. And you were in the end of life, her caregiver. So can you just tell us a little bit about your mom, Miss Sylvia?
Yes, so happy to. Happy birthday to my mom, Sylvia Hernandez. She's the best. um, my mom raised me and my siblings as a single mom, and so I have just like this deep respect for like everything that she brought into raising me, and some of the things that I didn't really know about until I was older and like she was passing away, and then after her death. So my mom is like, she is like the funniest person. She's just got the best sense of humor. And in the sense that like she can find a way to joyfully laugh about everything, even when like things are really tough. And she actually had this ongoing, lifelong love of photography that I didn't really know about until later. I found some photos that she and her best friend, who had also passed away when they were teenagers, like they ran around with their cameras together and like were always taking these artsy photographs. And, you know, I realizing these things later in life kind of helped me understand more about how she was so creative in the way that she raised us all and like found problem solving and made things work and made things fun and you know always found a way to make it happen. The things that you don't really like know about your parents when you're a kid, and you just think, like, "Mom, I need you to pick me up. I need you to
That's
take me
right.
somewhere." She was just, full of joy, full of laughter, full of creativity, and just so incredibly hardworking and always, always showing up for her kids. So happy birthday to my mom.
Happy birthday to her. And so, you are also an artist, and and we will talk about or your recent art, as an adult. But I was wondering, what were you like as a kid? Were you death curious? Were you a griefy kid?
I think I was actually. Okay, so um, in some ways that I don't think I realized, in other ways that I just thought was normal. So maybe some ways that I didn't fully comprehend when I was growing up is that actually my paternal grandfather and my maternal grandmother both passed away when my parents were very young. So my mom's mom died when she was 4, and my dad's dad died when he was like 14. And so knowing that there was this early loss on both sides of my family, it was kind of always just like a part of the socialization. in family group dynamics, but also like talking with my mom. She would always be talking about her grief, but not in like a after school special kind of way, more in like just this is a matter of fact. And she would always come back to things that in her life that were impacted by her mom dying when she was so young. And so at the time, I didn't really know that I was kind of being immersed in this honest and authentic approach to grief, lifelong grief. It just kind of became normal.
Mm-hmm.
And then in other ways, like the way that most people think children first encounter loss is people think about like pets. And obviously, like my mom, lost a parent at a very young age. But a lot of times when people think about the grief that children experience, they just assume that, oh, it's something like a pet. And for me, it kind of was, where I had a few hamsters. And when they died, because, they don't live very long, I was so active in like processing it. I was like telling my friends and like making drawings of them and like really trying to like honor that I was grieving these hamsters. And obviously, like, this is from a child's perspective. I didn't understand what bigger, like, life-changing loss was. But I just knew that it was important to talk about it. And then as I got older, like as a young child, as a preteen, as a teenager, there was just more and more loss around me and my family, extended family. And it became something that I was always aware of impacting the people that I loved and impacting me. So in a way, I've kind of always been griefy. And like coming from a Mexican American family, it's also like it's a pretty standard topic, So there's layers to it, but I don't think I would have, if you would have asked me when I was like 7 years old, like, are you griefy?
Right.
Like, what are you talking about?
I'm 7.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that actually leads me to your current art, because so much of the art that you've created and installed is a reflection of the grieving process. So there's 3 pieces, like specifically, that I am really, really drawn to. The first, Anticipatory Después, which visualizes the anticipatory grief of caregiving and the process of dying through performative videos and photography. I have to imagine that, and please use your words, these are mine, but like like just watching your videos and your photography, like I have to imagine it was like a support system as you were caring for your mother, like that you were somehow transmuting the pain through your art. Can you share a little bit about that, if that even rings true?
Yeah, it's interesting because that series did not begin until after she died. I had been, I've always been making art. I've always been an artist, and I was doing some like small drawings while I was taking care of her, like very small, like sketch pad, small, just trying to keep making things. But I really did not have the time or the capacity to make the work that I like, the scale and the depth of work that I normally make while I was caring for her. It just was so not not within reach, for good reason. Caregiving is such a huge responsibility that I don't think people fully understand until they're in it, like how much of your time and energy it takes to really support someone in that way. But I did have ideas like come up like while I was taking care of her, these like half-second sparks would cross my mind of things that were happening to her or to the both of us. And I kept kind of just telling myself, I'm going to come back to that later. And then after she died, I was like, all right, I have to go back to that. I really need to, like use this as a jumping off point to process what has happened. So in a way, yes, you're correct. It just was the timing of it was after she had died. And it was actually the first video in the series, Consequence, which has all the glass and stuff in it. It was like a week after she died that I ran over to Goodwill and like filled my whole trunk with all that glassware because I was kind of like on this mission of I have to do this for this next step in what's happening right now. So it was very quickly after, but it was something that I could not allow myself to do until she had passed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just like all of your senses, like your entire body, as well as like your psychic body, is like all attuned to the person that you're caregiving for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a very grounding experience, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And during that caregiving time, I mean, I know, from our previous conversations that you were kind of like the primary cook in the house. And so, you were caregiving even long before she was sick. Can you tell us a little bit about your kind of like cooking journey? Because that also ties in with your maternal grandmother.
Yeah. Oh my God, there's so many layers to this question. But yeah, so I've always loved to cook, and when my mom was like getting, progressively, more progressing in this illness, I was cooking for her more and more, but I've kind of always cooked for her in different ways. Something that I'm still starting to understand in terms of like a relationship to food and cooking that I'm still unpacking and understanding in terms of my family heritage and everything is that I've always loved to cook, and my mom kind of always seemed really hesitant around cooking, or like she would do it because she had to feed us, but she didn't enjoy it. She didn't like it was something that if as I got older, she would prefer me to cook than for her to cook. And I mean, like, like as a teenager, as an adult, when we would, be around each other, I would be cooking for her. And I realized over time, like, why she had such an aversion. I didn't fully understand it, but she said that, when her mom died, her mom was in the kitchen cooking, and my mom was sitting on the floor. She was 4 years old, like sitting on the floor, playing or just waiting, watching. And she had a heart attack. And when she fell on top of my mom's legs. And she actually, the way that she fell was like kind of in the way of the door. And so for a minute, like the other people in the house, like couldn't get into the kitchen. And it was very traumatic in a lot of ways. And so my mom said that that's why she didn't like being in the kitchen. But she loved when I cooked for her. She loved like how it tasted. I think she loved that relationship to food that had this kind of like buffer or this safety to it. And when I was younger, I didn't know this. I didn't understand it. I just loved cooking. And so I was like, how can you not love cooking? It's so much fun. Like I would every holiday, I would make this elaborate like apple pie that had to be baked in a brown paper bag. And
Oh my
like,
gosh.
I would do it from scratch and everything. I was like a tiny child doing this because I just loved it so much. And so I guess now where I'm at as an adult and processing my own grief and thinking about my mother's grief, I feel like in a way, I was like taking up this small role that her mom had, didn't have the chance to enact for her as she grew up, like that she loved so much that I cooked for her and that I so enjoyed to feed and nourish people. And that I could do that for her was really special. And in ways that I didn't always realize was really special. And then especially when she was getting more and more sick, I was constantly trying to like figure out new ways of preparing her food that she would enjoy, because like as you're progressing towards death, your taste buds are changing, your stomach gets upset by different things, especially when you add in all the medications and everything. And there is a point when, food is no longer helpful, but leading up to that, it can bring a lot of comfort. And so I was constantly trying all these different recipes and ways of cooking stuff and, trying to make her meals something that was still nourishing and joyful, like even as it became less and less necessary. So we had this really complicated part of our relationship in food.
Yeah, it's such a paradox, this thing, this experience from childhood, witnessing her mother die in front of her and, falling on top of her. And then, her daughter becomes the salve and the healing portal for her through that, cooking and being in the kitchen and that experience. It's quite the paradox.
Like I said, I'm still trying to fully wrap my mind around it. I just know that it feels like very significant to, what was a big part of our relationship.
Well, and that leads me to another one of your art installations, Utiles Curativos, where you gilded these common caregiving tools. You gilded them in silver and gold and copper leaf to, quote, reconsider their value within the difficult circumstances that they were used. Can you share a little bit about that piece and how you got there?
Yeah, this is another one of those things that like passed my mind very briefly while I was taking care of her, that kind of came back a little bit later after she had died, where thinking about all the things that her care required and how some things were really difficult or really uncomfortable, and these various tools were really critical in those moments because they made it possible to make sure that she was comfortable, make sure that like things were safe for her, make sure that she was not leading into complications in other areas because things weren't done properly. And it kind of became combined with some of the research that I was doing afterwards about really just how common my situation as her caregiver was, of being in this Mexican American family, like being, one of the women in the family that is taking care, and not having a lot of the resources necessary to do this in a better way for her, and all the statistics around the lack of support for not only family caregivers but just caregivers in general, because there are a lot of professional caregivers who just do not get compensated properly for all the work that they do. And I just was thinking, well, okay, there's not this immediate solution to all these problems, but in this moment when I'm like holding this mouth swab and I'm taking care of her, the one way that I can make it just a little bit less stressful and awful is to remember that what I'm doing is this very sacred and intimate act of care, and hoping that by showing these objects in that way, in the way that we might see different precious relics throughout history, is like that will also be reflected on the person who's using it, because it's so easy to think of it as, oh, I'm not doing this right, I'm not doing enough of it, I'm not doing it good enough, and I don't want this cheap plastic crap, like I don't want to be doing this at all. But really, someone, whether by choice or by necessity, is trusting you to provide this for them. And that's an incredible honor to be in that role of service and to be witness to that. So just trying to show how precious it really is.
Yeah, I know that that's one of the things that's really important to you that we've discussed, the artist's role in creating cultural death rituals, as well as emotional public expressions of grief. While you were caretaking for your mom, and perhaps even before that, I'm guessing, outside of your mom talking about her grief, that there wasn't really a backdrop of that type of support in your life. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty well known, especially now, like how just avoidant in general Western culture is to talking about death in like healthy and open ways. And so even if there's a few outliers, most of the time, when you go to work, when you go to school, when you like are around, your larger social circles, people don't really know what to do with it. And they get really uncomfortable and they clam up a little bit, or they just hope that like you'll change the subject or something. So yeah, it was actually pretty unique that my mom was so open about it. And I think that we've culturally talking about it a little bit more now, like since COVID started and everything that's happened since COVID started and everything that's followed it, I think we've become a little bit more capable of discussing it on a surface level. But I don't think that there's a really deep understanding and integration of it into our culture. And so I do think that whether it's a visual artist or a filmmaker or a poet or, anybody who is approaching the topic in a creative way, I think those really are like access points for us to deepen that understanding because clearly we don't know how to talk about it. And I don't think that forcing certain language around it is the answer, because really what I've seen that result in for the most part is people being prescriptive about everything and how it's supposed to look, which ends up just doing more harm than good. So yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's a huge opportunity to really heal our relationship with death and dying is through creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying that. Last fall, I held an outdoor grief ritual at the Albany Bulb over here. And, me and all the participants were dressed in white and light colors. And towards the end of the event, we were all sitting, meditating for the last few minutes. And you could hear two young boys, they were on a scavenger hunt. And we were sitting around a fire pit. And they needed something that we, had in the midst of us. And so, you can hear their feet kind of pitter patter and run over. And then they stop. And then they're watching us. And then I hear one of the little boys say, "Oh, it's a funeral." And then they just kind of held the moment. And then they scampered off, their little pitter patter feet scampered off. And I tell you, Brianna, I was like, oh, they're the reason I held this. Like, yeah, the participants, I hope you got something from this. I certainly did. But like the moment of them just seeing grief in public, it meant everything to me.
Absolutely.
Right. But like you said, it's still superficial, right? Like I didn't have the opportunity to say, actually, young boys, this is what we're doing and this is why. But, little by little.
That's all we can do.
That's right. That's right. Little by little. Well, so speaking of little by little, this brings me to this other installation that you created, which I have to assume was created little by little, but you tell me, Aquí Descansamos, which began as a living cemetery of floral structures, which mirrored the shapes of common grave markers. To the listeners, of course, there's going to be links to all of this in the episode page of your podcast player. But, essentially, you've got what are these quote unquote common grave markers. So let me just give some of the names to help the listeners begin to visualize what you created. So there was the fairy garden casket design, the sandcastle design, the lattice moss shroud. I mean, the pictures literally look like if you were at a funeral home shopping for a casket and you have all these different types of plant matter to choose from. Please tell us about how you created this. What was that experience like for you?
You're right. It was definitely little by little. The ones that you mentioned are actually some of the more recent ones that was really the inspiration was like a funeral showroom, like a car show. But when you go in and they have all these casket samples and like they show you, oh, and this is the satin inside and you can get this little pillow and I really modeled those more recent ones after that, just thinking about how we can really, I guess, reconsider the green burial options that have been around for millennia, but in a really whimsical way. Nowadays, when you talk about green burial, people think that it's like scary and weird on the level of they just make all these assumptions about the safety of that. And then also there's this added layer of how much we've been literally sold this idea that if you love this person, then you will pay crazy amounts of money for the most elaborate casket and headstone and all the things. And so when you bring up green burial, a lot of people think, oh, it's like really plain and not personal. And, you know, I have to show that I love how much I love my person. And maybe they're not saying this out loud, but it's like kind of this running in the background, you know? And so I had some of these designs, like I just took this really generic plain casket design and started adding my own interpretations onto the structure in moss and in mushrooms and soil and corn husks and, you know, literally sand and seaweed, and thinking about, well, what if it looked as elaborate as all these other ones, but was made out of natural materials? So it's not only serving this purpose of making green burial more accessible and approachable, but also just the conversation of what do you want to happen to you when you die? Because if someone walks up and they see the toadstool is the name of the mushroom one, and maybe they laugh a little bit,
right?
You know,
right?
And then they're like, oh, okay, this isn't this big, bad, scary. I can talk about this for a minute, you know, like we were saying before, little by little, you know, if I can get someone to walk up to this and have a tiny chuckle and then be like, oh, actually, that would be kind of cool if I was buried in this, you know, in the future, or thinking about their loved ones who maybe are actively making these decisions and would want something that reflects more of them as a person and not necessarily just how much money you can spend. Mm-hmm. So it actually started, the grave markers started with living plants, and then I've been adding to the series with more like dried and preserved materials that are still biodegradable, but have the added benefit of like being able to be mobile because they're not rooted in like in literal soil. So there's different versions of them, but it really started as this question of like, why do we bury the way that we bury? What else has existed and what else can exist? And making the whole series as this like invitation for people to consider their own ideas. You know, mine is just presented as one alternative to the convention. And I hope that it would inspire people to think about what matters to them. Maybe they don't want the fairy garden made out of moss, but maybe they want something different than they thought they did before they saw it, you know?
That's right. Yeah, especially as we continue to run out of space in cemeteries. You know, there's only a finite amount of land. Caskets don't go anywhere. They don't degrade, you know, the traditional large caskets. And look, I come from a family, we love a beautiful casket in my family. Like my grandmother picked out her casket before she died. Like she had her vision of what she wanted, and it was that traditional ornate casket, but that's not going to be sustainable in the future. So and I think also, like when my mom passed away, I had to transport her back here to the Bay Area from where she and I were living in Southern California, and I couldn't afford to ship home an entire body, so I had to have her cremated. You know, we had not talked about what she wanted, but as a Catholic person, you're not supposed to cremate. I think the Vatican's a little bit easier on those rules now, but I did feel some shame as a young adult having to cremate my mom and just bury the box. But I think, you know, what your art has really done and continues to do is like, yeah, like seeing this, you know, metal box, I want to say almost ordained it with flowers. And, you know, it's like you can make it something really beautiful and personal, even when it's the quote unquote affordable option. It doesn't necessarily have to be looked at like that through this lens of shame and embarrassment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
100%.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you, you know, as a death doula, I'm wondering like first what you were like, let me say this, you were a death doula before you were caretaking for your mom. I don't believe that you
No,
need
I
a
was not.
certificate. You don't think so?
Before?
Just not necessarily like with the certificate, but as a role in the world. So So let me say this. So like when people are like, especially when people ask me, well, how do you make money as a death doula? I'm like, well, I don't. I have a job. like I'm a death doula at the grocery store. I'm a death doula when I pump gas. Like this, it's just the way I move in the world. That's kind of how I approach it. And I don't necessarily think that you need a certificate to claim the role of a doula, although there are some things that can be helpful if you take a class. So that's kind of what I'm referring to is this walking someone home role in life. So let me ask you before I proceed, like how does that musing land with you?
I mean, I completely agree. Like, you don't need to get a certificate to be a great death doula. I was saying like, oh, I don't think so, because I actually think that caring for my mom kind of, I guess, formed my my death doula. I don't know what the right word is. Not, I want to say like calling, but it's more of, like you said, how you move through the world. I think it kind of pulled those parts of me together in doing that for her. But beforehand, I don't think I would have had any language to be like, this is how I'm like thinking or doing things or anything.
Yeah.
It was really by being forced into this situation and having to figure it out along the way that really pulled it together. Where I ended up doing a lot of research, like book research after she died, that really just confirmed everything that I had intuitively and through experience learned with her. It was really that experience that shaped it. And then afterwards, I really, as an artist, I'm interested in how research can support the work that I'm doing. And also, as an artist that's always offering workshops, I'm also interested in how it can support the people who are participating in those things. And so I had started doing my research from the perspective of an artist wanting to have this bigger picture narrative, in addition to my personal experience that was going into the work. And that's really what led me to end up taking a course, because I wanted to learn more about these logistics from that outside perspective. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, I don't think that taking a course is required. I think it can help with certain things.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's really more of like what is in you, and like you said, how you move through the world. But I don't think that before caring for my mom, I don't think I would have understood what any of that meant. And it's different than, I say this as like, I know a lot of people who have, watched close, parents or children or siblings die, through cancer. And I know that many of them have been caregivers, but it doesn't always end up in the same scenario because, my siblings were around. I think my mom and I was working the most with her on those day-to-day necessities. But, they didn't come out the other end thinking, I'm going to be a death doula. It was really something that like was might have been there, but wasn't really shaped until we went through that experience together. And then afterwards, it was more of like formally, okay, how do I make sense of this in the context of the world?
Yeah.
And I will say, like, the person that I took the course with, Alua Arthur, who is the most amazing human, going with Grace as her program. And she said that throughout the course, she's like, you don't need to like complete this course to start calling yourself a death doula.
Right.
Like, this is really to support your journey and whatever your goals are, because every death doula has a different focus and different goals. But like, it's not, this doesn't make or break you,
That's right. That's right.
So I really appreciated that, because it was kind of more affirming to what I had experienced with my mom, was that this is something that is really internal. And if you're not called to it in some way, then you're probably not going to go there,
Right. Even if you are caretaking, perhaps.
Right.
Yeah. So for you, the caretaking itself was the initiation into doulaism or doulahood. Yeah. I also took the same course. So going with Grace, I will put that link in the show notes if people are curious, because Alua Arthur is fantastic. Yeah.
She's amazing.
Yes. So I'm wondering, you know, after you decided to take the program and make it official, how did the people in your immediate life respond or react to that? Like, I'm just wondering, yeah, what's been the response in your personal life?
I don't think it really surprised anybody. I'm like just always just on and on about death this and death that. Like it's just I think it was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But I do think that similar to other parts of talking about loss and everything that comes with it, I think there's this assumption that it's this one kind of standard thing in the same way that people think grief looks a certain way. I think there's a general misunderstanding about what death doulas do and don't do and all the many ways that they can do the work because as you know from taking the course, like Alua really started with her background as an attorney, and
Right.
so a lot of her early work was so focused on those legal matters, whereas other people are much more focused on that emotional in-person, bedside support, and other people is more
Mhm.
focused on, logistic support and some people come
Mhm.
to it with a background in psychology and some people come to it with a background in religion and sometimes, you come to it
Yeah.
with different things. And I think the main thing that I've tried to share with the people around me is like how different it can be for the needs that are there and how all of us have our own really unique gifts that we're
Mhm.
trying to share. Like I, as an artist, like that is my focus, how I can blend those things together to have the biggest and the most, I want to say, like authentic impact that like has integrity. I think that that's where my strength lies in like in approaching this work through the arts.
Mhm.
And so explaining that to people sometimes they're like, what do you mean you're not just like holding someone's hand like as they're taking their last breath? And I'm like,
Right.
that's not like it's so much bigger than one act.
Mhm.
Um, and so really just trying to share that education with people,
Mhm.
that this can look like many things. And it's really wonderful because, as you know, I feel like our community of death doulas, like we all are super connected. There's not like a ton of us out there.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
we all like know each other and can point to each other when something comes up and someone's like, oh, I need help with this. We know someone to point them to that fits those needs.
Right.
And so really just sharing that it's very open and unique as the people who are providing that care.
Mhm. Yeah, and what you're saying really reminds me of the saying that it takes a village because like I can imagine like a community of death doulas would be great to have like in
Hmm.
connection so that you have the legal expert and the one who's about the paperwork and getting things in order. And then you have, what I call myself is I'm an emotional support animal. That's what I'm there for is comfort.
I love that.
So it's like, to have different people in your life show up during this very sacred and important crossing over.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so, you've spoken a little bit about this. I know that deaf education through art is really important to you, that you have art-centered workshops, you're an art curator. What are some of the things that are on top of mind for you right now? Like, what's on the edge for you in terms of what you would like to be either workshopping in the community or educating? What are you growing into right now?
That's a great question. I think I always have like multiple irons in the fire. Like I can't sit still. I gotta have like a bunch of things that I'm working on. So I'm working towards a few different things in regards to that question. But I think I'm trying to, as a curator, knowing that those of us out here who are like deep in this work, we're thankfully growing, but still relatively small
Hmm.
community. And so I'm really trying to connect with folks more who are also making work about this, because I know when I first started to make work about it, I'm definitely not the first person to have made work about it, but I was struck by how few people like that I was either directly or indirectly connected to also had touched the subject, like hadn't touched the subject or were very hesitant to. And that includes like the people who were in charge of like exhibition spaces. They're so resistant to it. And so I feel like over the years, building up my own work, but also trying to research and learn more about other people's work, I'm trying to find ways to connect and like celebrate and uplift the work that other people are doing in this way. Because I think if they see more of us talking about it in all the unique ways that we can talk about it, it'll have a much bigger impact. Because again, like there's not one way to grieve, there's not one way to die. And you know, my way of grieving and talking about dying is only one way. And so I'm trying to really build those long-term relationships with other people in this way, so that we can collaborate, so that, you know, can work on shows together and really just broaden that network of what people see when they look up the topic.
Along that tip, you know, of you curating things and sharing information and linking up people and doing those deep dives with people. And you might have already answered this, but what's nourishing you right now? Either food or just even community wise. What's filling your cup these days?
Man, you know, in terms of food, I have gotten really into making my own matcha lattes at home. Like I've gone down this rabbit hole, like just really loving everything about matcha. And so I've been maybe having a little too much of it, but it's definitely nourishing. I feel like it's this thing that, I mean, obviously I need caffeine to get through the day. But then also I just feel like it, you know, I used to be a barista. And so anytime I'm working on like crafting a beverage, I approach it the same way that I approach like cooking something in a pan or in the oven, where it feels like the movements that I need to make or the steps and the, you know, the order that things go in feels like therapeutic to me. And so when I make my matcha and then I can like sit and like sip it through my straw, like, you know, I'm like, oh, this feels nice.
It's an experience.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So that I'd say for like food. But then I guess like a community level is really continuing to work with people through art to create, you know, healing experiences. And sometimes that's related to death work, and sometimes it's, you know, a totally different show or a totally different workshop. But a lot of that is through Ma's house, which I don't know if I mentioned earlier. Maybe I mentioned it when we had just connected to, you know, set up a time and stuff. But so I curate at this place called Ma's House, which is a residency and gallery space on the Shinnecock Reservation. And it's really like a small team effort of an artist-led space. And so it feels very nourishing because, you know, all of us who are in our individual roles in this space, like getting to lead with the creativity of our perspective as artists, but then also it's like in service to other artists and in service to the larger community. And so that is like always filling my cup up.
Wow, that's really beautiful. And there will definitely be a link to that because you guys you open up residencies throughout the year and invite
Yeah.
artists of color, you know, from all over to come. So definitely check that out, y'all.
Yep. All year residency. Our exhibitions are like 2 to 3 months, depending on the time of year. There's like weekly workshops. There's so much, so much to experience.
And this is more of just like something I want to know. I've just been thinking about this idea of being a curator. Like, I'm imagining it to be almost like a magical jigsaw puzzle that like you get your pieces and like they come together, and then once it's together, you're like, oh, look, it's all together. Can you just talk a little bit about like how you curate meaning like from like a spiritual place? That's what I'm imagining it to be. I don't know. Maybe I'm
Hmm.
totally off.
I think that's a pretty good way to describe it. Except for I would say that like the puzzle pieces are not predetermined.
Right, right, right,
They're kind of
right.
like shaped as you go.
Yeah.
And I think for me, calling back to some of the earlier talking points today, is that it's really about building relationships, because
Mm,
whether you're, working with one artist, or you're working with a group, or you're working with material that is, in a historic context and maybe there's no living person attached to it, um, it's really something where you have to have a relationship with the work so that you can take proper care. Um, similar to caregiving, like you can't just be like, this is how it's going to go. You really have to get that
mm-hmm.
person on board with you. Um, and as somebody I'm an artist, and so a lot of times when I'm working with a curator, it really is about trust, like trusting that they're going to take good care of you and your work,
Mm-hmm.
and present it and describe it to people in a way that is aligned with um like who you are and what you represent. Like the last thing you want is for a curator to come in and like completely misrepresent you and
Mm,
make everybody assume things about you and your work that are not what you're about.
mm,
um and yeah, and so like I really see it as like you're shaping that puzzle as you go, but you're also really a caretaker of the material, the artwork, the content, and also like the artist,
mm-hmm.
that it's I feel like as an artist there's certain set of like responsibilities that go into like making your work, but then as a curator there's a different set of responsibilities that
Mm,
are
mm-hmm.
really outside of you. um I actually think about it similarly to what we talk about a lot in Going with Grace, of like meeting people where they're at. Like you can't
Mm-hmm.
force somebody to have a certain understanding or relationship to death just because like you think they should think of it that way. You have to
Mm-hmm.
really meet them where they're at and like be understanding and empathetic to where they're at and why they're where they're at. And it's the same thing with curating. Like I can't force someone's work to be about something that it's not.
Mm.
Or like, oh, I want to do it this way, so you you should too. It's really cultivating that relationship and finding a way um to present the work and the artist in their best possible light, because sometimes artists have a very specific vision about how their work is displayed, and other
Mm-hmm.
times they really do want to like hand that trust over to you because their focus was on making the work, and then they
Mm-hmm.
want someone that they can trust to like literally put it up, but like to put it up where people can resonate with it in a way that maybe they can't if they're just putting a picture of it online or something.
Mm-hmm. Right, right, right. Thank you for humoring me.
Yeah.
So I only have a couple questions left for you, but I do just want to ask, since today is Miss Sylvia's birthday, will you be doing anything today? Are there any rituals or habits or yeah, how do you celebrate your mom on her birthday?
Every year is a little bit different.
Mhm.
I always take the day off. Like today just happens to be a Saturday, but I always take off for her birthday and her death day just so
Mhm.
that I can spend the day however I need to.
Yeah.
And today is much more of like a resting day.
Mm,
I really was glad that we could do the podcast today so I could shout out her birthday to the
that's
world.
right.
So for me, that's like a celebration. But in general, I think today is more of like resting. Like I've been lighting her she has a little tea light candle that fits into the top of her urn. So like I've been lighting her candle all day, lighting incense, make sure she's got all of her snacks on the altar. But really just like taking it easy, taking some time to rest and allow the exhausting part of grief to take a break,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, every year is a little bit different, but that's what this year feels like.
hmm Earlier you mentioned your mom's great sense of humor. I'm just wondering, have there in the past you and I have spoken about like some of the kind of liminal experiences that we might have, after our loved one has crossed over. Have you had any like since your mom has passed away, any kind of like funny things that have happened that you're like, okay, there's her sense of humor even in death?
Funny things. Um, you know, since her passing, I can't think of any like funny moments like after her death of things that happened
Okay.
where I was like, oh, that was totally. But there were a lot of things that happened like as she was dying where
Mm.
I was like laughing so hard because she would toggle between being like incredibly in denial about how progressed her illness was
Mhm.
and then randomly like doing or saying things that were just off the wall. Like or like I don't even maybe she wasn't trying to be funny, but it just came across that way. Like so, well, it was actually I think on Mother's Day, my sister and I had taken her to the garden center 'cause she loved to buy plants.
Mhm.
And she was too tired by the time we were walking around. And so while we were checking out, she was like, I'm gonna go sit in the car. And I was like, okay, And so we're waiting in line. We finally check out. We go out and we're walking up and we make eye contact with her sitting in someone else's car.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, what? It took me a second. She had gotten into the wrong car that was 2 spaces down from
Oh
my
my
sister's
gosh.
car because it was the same type of car, and it was unlocked, which I'm like, "Who does not
Yeah,
lock
who
their
leaves
car?"
their doors unlocked?
But she looked at us and we looked at her and we all started busting up laughing. Whoever's car it was, they never knew. They were never the wiser. We
Oh
didn't
my
run into them at
gosh.
all. But she's making jokes about her chemo brain and like how I was like,
Uh-huh.
yeah, clearly, because what in the world? Like, I don't know how this, like, I don't know. It was just so funny. The whole, like, it felt like a scene in a movie where we just all froze and we're staring at each other, like, what's going on right now?
Like
Uh,
something's not right.
But she was, like, so chill and funny about it. I feel like
Mm,
normally she would be like, "Oh my god, I can't believe," but
right.
she was, like, laughing and making jokes about her own brain and, like,
Wow.
all these things. It was great. And then this other one, I still don't know if she actually was trying to be funny or if she just was losing it a little too far. But when speaking of her urn so her urn has this little slot in the top. It's like a metal lid and there's a divot where you can put a tea light candle. It's how it's
Mhm.
advertised. And so when I was with her sitting like talking about, what does she want? How like does she want to be cremated or not? And we started like Googling urns and we found this one and I was like, oh, what about this one? Like, it looks kind of like how she would decorate the house. Like it didn't really look like a normal urn.
Mhm.
And I was like, "Oh, and there's a candle, like, you love candles." She loves candles. So I was like, "Oh, what about this one?" And she was like, "Well, what if it burns me?"
Oh my God. Girl.
I was like,
I don't think that's gonna be the problem.
it's gonna be burnt already, but, yeah, I still don't know if she meant to be funny or not because she said
Right.
it, like, so genuinely, but it was pretty hilarious in the moment. I was like, "Okay." I'm like, that is still something that, like, my siblings and I laugh about
Yes,
because it was just a classic moment with her.
that's great. Well, thank you for sharing that, and stories about your mom, Miss Sylvia, and your inner life and how you create your artwork. I just have one final question for you. Knowing that we carry grief and love in tandem, what is your quote unquote life recipe for walking with both of them?
You know, I don't really think that they're different.
Mm,
I think it's more just like all of the different things that make up who we are, like, are always coexisting. I think they're just part of one experience. And so I really feel like it's I'm trying to think of an example in food. Like with the recipe part where, like, equal parts this and this,
hmm
and, like, stir until combined.
That's right. Emulsify.
How I feel about it. It's like, I think that this idea of, like, having to separate them
Mm,
is not realistic for most people, but they feel this pressure to.
mm,
You know how people will say, like, in the grief community, talking about how, like, sadness and joy can coexist. Like, you can
hmm
be so happy about something that's happened in your life and also, like, sad that you can't share it with the person
Right.
that you've lost. And there's many examples like that of, like, the two coexisting. And so, like, I just feel like they're very intertwined,
hmm
and it's just equal parts, mixed till combined.
There you go. Brianna, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. Thank you for listening. And now, here's a little advice from my grandmother.
Life isn't easy. You just have to make the best of it.